Hi, so I got this crazy idea to read you part of chapter 6 of my book called Burn It Down. That's the name of the chapter. The setting for this particular chapter is Elena, who's a 14-year-old girl. She's one of the characters in the book. Gets placed into temporary custody with Alex and Michelle. Alex and Michelle essentially bring Elena back to the alley so that she can go up into her house and get her belongings because they're essentially going to lock this house up. She's not going to be able to get any more things out of this house. So she was given permission, they were given permission to bring Elena back to her house to collect her things. Now, when you read the book, you'll have to find out what happens in chapter 5 and why the house is empty. There's no adults there. So she's not in any apparent danger to go up to her house and get her things. So I'm going to pick up there. Alex and Michelle are in the alley talking to some kids that know Elena, that were really excited to see Elena when they drove up. They get into conversations with the kids as Elena goes up to the empty house by herself. So hang tight. We're going to go through the story together. As we stood there talking to the kids, Elena walked over to her house. I asked her if she had a key and if she wanted me to come up with her. She pulled her keys out of her purse and shook her head no, as if to say she was okay. I watched her walk through the gate. I could hear her walking up the stairs with her keys dangling in her hands. I turned back towards the kids, and Sam, a little boy, had so much to tell me about his day at school and a new dance that he had learned from his teacher. He was so excited to share some of the moves he had been picking up during class. Anna was humming a tune that she had learned that she would also be singing in the play that her and Sam would be in together. They both asked Alex and I if we were able to come. Nia was joyfully running around with her doll that Alex had just purchased for the goodie bags that were in the trunk that we were going to use for an event. She was so happy, and I was so glad that he offered it up to her. I looked down the alley and saw the guys that Cedric had been standing out there with. It was so strange not to see him standing around with them. They didn't seem to notice that I was in the alley. Miss May, the old lady that's usually outside of the alley when I've come before on her porch, was not there. It seemed so eerily quiet and full of life and laughter, if only for a minute. The sun was still bright, and it was such a clear blue sky with only a couple of clouds. I watched Alex as he played with the kids and tossed the ball back and forth with Sam. He handed Tyrell a $20 bill and told him to buy something for himself this week. After a moment, I looked down at my watch and I realized that Elena had been in her house for at least 15 minutes. Just as I looked up from my watch, Alex leaned over to me and suggested that I go see about her. I looked up at the house and it was so dark. How could I have let her go up by herself? I told Alex I was going in to check. I jolted through the wooden gate, slamming it behind me, and ran up the stairs, skipping every other stair on the way up. I was panting by the time I got up to the door. The door was wide open, and I could smell smoke coming from the inside. I instantly looked down, and there was a small flame on the brown carpet in front of her feet. It was inching towards her tennis shoes. I immediately ran over to her, where I saw a candle on its side. She appeared to have dropped the candle she was using to see her way through the rooms. The curtains were closed. She didn't move. She just stood there, almost frozen, staring at the flames. I quickly ran to the kitchen and grabbed a bowl that I saw, filled it full of water, and threw it on the flame on the carpet. Thank God it had not spread. I grabbed Elena and said, "We have to go." And she twisted her bag slowly on her shoulder, and she looked back at the living room and the burned spot on the floor. I grabbed her again and her hand. She pulled back from me, stopping and looking at me. I closed the door. I took one step down the stairs, and she was still standing at the top. She looked at me and said, "I just want to burn it down. Please, I just want to burn it down to the ground." I didn't know what to say as I looked up at her, holding her hand tight. She looked lifeless, standing there with her eyes wide open, just saying repeatedly, "I just want it to all burn down." I turned around and grabbed her bag and squeezed her hand a little tighter and said, "God will burn it down, Elena. He wants to burn it down right now, but he won't do it until we go. We must get off these stairs, Elena, and get out of the gate. You're never going to have to come back here again. I promise you, you will never have to come back here again. Let's go. She slowly followed behind me, taking one step down the stairs at a time, looking back at the door, tears streaming down her face. As we walked out of the gate, I turned to her and said, "Turn around." We stood there looking up at the house, holding hands. I told her to close her eyes and imagine those flames burning again. I said, "See, God is burning it down without you. He just needed us to let him." She opened her eyes and wiped her tears. She took her bag off her shoulder and put it on mine. She looked at me and said, "I'm ready to go now." This was really hard for Elena to go back into the house. And she almost felt stuck there, like she couldn't get herself out of there. That if everything that had happened to her had felt like hell all this time, then she might as well have burned with it. She couldn't see the light of hope. She couldn't see a new beginning. She couldn't see that Michelle and Alex had been sent to rescue her from this place. She had not been back in that living room and in that house for quite some time. And when she walked in there that day, she realized all the bad things that had happened to her within those walls, all the bad things that had caused her so much hurt and pain. And at the end of the day, sometimes when you're in your situation, you can't see yourself out. You can't see yourself outside of it. And sometimes it seems easier just to burn with it, just to go down with it. But God sends us hope. God sends us hope through certain people, through situations, through the little things to remind us that it's not our responsibility to take care of all that mess and all those things that are around you that you had no control over. But God does care for you, and God does have a plan for you. And just because all of that's going to come burning to the ground doesn't mean you have to go with it. God's got a new place and a new way forward out of the alleyway of circumstances in your life. And sometimes you have to take one step in front of the other. You have to let somebody take your hand, turn you around, and walk you out of it. I hope you've enjoyed this part of the story. Lots of revisions, lots of writing still to do, but I've got hope for Elena. And I'm praying for Michelle and her courage to keep fighting to show this girl there's a new way forward. She just hasn't seen it yet. Thanks for listening to my story.